Hello, everybody. Welcome to our final week of the Art of Transformation. I am Matthew Oxford. This is my wife, Jennifer Oxford. We are certified Optavia coaches, and Jen is also a licensed mental health therapist. So we're excited, all of you were able to jump on this evening, and we hope we have a couple great things to share with everybody. So, got anything to say?
I think I have a couple things we can talk about tonight. Yeah, so I'm really excited. Week 6. This is actually pretty exciting because the relapse stage can happen at any time, and it affects all the other stages of change. But it is also the part that keeps us from moving forward a lot of times. So when we relapse, that's a big part of it. So I'm excited to talk about the how to expect relapse, and then how to move forward, move through it, and recover from relapse tonight. So we're going to get started by talking a little bit, and let's go over. So this is the 6th week. We've done all the different stages of change, and this one applies to everything. So hopefully it'll be really effective. Okay, next one. Okay, but I want to review last week a little bit. We talked about the maintenance stage and the idea of being capable versus done. And I thought that this was a really good thing to review, because a lot of times when we relapse, it's the opposite. We think we're done, and really what we need to realize is we're capable of moving forward and doing better, right? And so as you continue to move through and get past relapse, you're going to gain all those mastery skills. We talked about the 7 mastery skills you see on the page real quick, and let me read them to you. 1, you remain calm, clear-headed, confident. And that happens because you've experienced relapse. Comfortable and capable with skills comes because you've had to learn the skills through trial and error. 3, the use of simple, concise language comes again through trial and error. So all these mastery skills, personal development and expertise, and the desire to contribute comes through trial and error. You can understand the pros and cons of your actions comes through trial and error. And being humble and open-minded and continue to grow comes from the humility, and we're going to talk about humility as it comes through the relapse process tonight. And then actively seeking to apprentice others and help other people through their relapse. And so all of these skills of mastery come because people have gone through the relapse process multiple times. All right, so let's go on and let's talk about this, right? So we've gone through, those are the 5 stages of change. Relapse is about trying again, right? And it doesn't matter which stage you do this in, and that's why there's not another picture, is because you can relapse in pre-contemplation, in contemplation, in preparation, in action, and in maintenance. And you can go through multiple phases and experience this in all phases. And it can also kind of help you jump around. Change is not a linear process. It has a lot of ups and downs. And so I want people to kind of be aware that there's no one look of relapse. Some people who are relapsing look super happy, and some people look super frustrated. But there's not one look at what relapse looks like. And so don't think, this is, I'm either in relapse or I'm not. A lot of times there is a process of going back and figuring out how to get through the other stages. But if you've successfully gotten through the other stages, you're going to get through your relapse. Okay. All right, so we're going to talk real quick about thoughts. So you may have heard this before, and I'm not going to go deep into it, but that thoughts lead to actions and to relapse. Okay, so our relapse is connected to our thoughts. So one of the things that happens first is that we experience something and then we label it in our thoughts as failure. Failure leads to feelings of hopelessness. Avoiding leads to feelings of shame, fear, and then eventually we're in relapse where we're kind of stuck, where we're no longer trying, but we're just stuck. And that's where a lot of us, some of us are there now, or we know that place very well, being in relapse. So I want you to think about that is that all of these things connect to each other. But they come from your thoughts. And if you can reframe the idea of relapse, then you're going to be able to recover from it and regroup a lot faster. Okay, so I'm actually going to have Matt stop share for a minute. I'm going to talk to you about this. So nobody likes failing. And it's really important to understand that that's okay. You don't have to like failing. If you liked failing, you would never succeed. But failure is just one part of the success process. And so a lot of people, when they go through relapse, they have a lot of shame attached to that. They think, oh, I failed, I did this again. It attaches to other times in their life where they may have felt like they failed, or other messages that they received about not being good enough. And so your thoughts related to relapse are going to tie in to all the things you've experienced in your life. There's actually a really great movie, and I have not watched it recently, but I know it's a really great movie, and it's not
It's not No Karate Kid.
It's not the Karate Kid this time, although he went through like relapse, and we could talk about that. But it's actually a cartoon. It's called Meet the Robinsons, and he goes in the future and meets his future self, but his future self praises his mistakes and is a famous inventor. And he sees that failing is part of the process. And so if you ever are feeling like, I am not sure what I want to do or how I feel or if I can recover, they actually, in the movie, they celebrate failure, because failure is a sign that you've tried. And trying is not something you should be ashamed of. Improving yourself isn't something to be ashamed of. And that is what keeps a lot of people from moving forward, is this fear of failure. I was in a meeting earlier today, and I had a really good friend who had a quote that says, most of what we want is on the other side of fear, including success. And so we need to be able to move past that fear of failure and understand that the fear is just an emotion. And because it's an emotion, we can change it. That doesn't mean it's easy, but we will be able to change it. And so what I like to say to people is that relapse is normal. Like, people ask me all the time, am I normal, or is this normal? Relapse is normal, right? Perfectionism is not realistic or normal. So you are going to fail. There is going to be a day where mentally or emotionally or whatever you act out, and we're going to talk about why that happens. And it's not because you're not good enough. And if you read in The Habits of Health, it talks about how we sometimes get set up for failure, both physiologically and mentally. And what we need to do is acknowledge that process and be willing to push through, rather than be afraid of that process. But that is the process of growing. And I like to talk about walking, right? So when you were a little kid, if you were afraid of failure, none of you would be willing to walk, because you're not going to do it right. And nobody looks at a 2-year-old, right? Did I tell them this before? I can't remember. I do a lot of therapy. I can't remember which stories I tell to which people. But a 2-year-old, nobody, like, when they first get up and walk, nobody's like, oh my gosh, that 2-year-old failed. They are praising him. Oh my gosh, he tried. I wonder if he'll try again. What if we were that kind to ourselves? What if every time we failed, we said, I wonder if they'll try again. I'm going to cheer them on. I'm going to help him. I'm going to teach him. I'm going to give him support. All of those things. Then we would all be really successful. We would all be metaphorically walking in our change. And I think, although we need support, and as we're moving in action, we've talked about finding a system that gives you all that support and capability so that you fail the least amount as possible. I mean, you don't want to set yourself up for failure, but that when you do fail, you understand this is part of the learning process. So if you're trying to change, but you're not trying to learn, we're going to get really, really disrupted very quickly, because learning is a very important part of the change process. And relapse is the process of learning, not just the process of growth. All right, so let's go back. We're going to talk, if I can remember right, I think we're talking about the crisis cycle. So let me tell you what you're looking at real quick. This is a really basic crisis cycle, and there's lots of other ones that you can look at. But one of the reasons that I wanted to look at this one is there's 2 crisis cycles. There's one about what happens when you're in crisis, and one about how to respond. And right now I just want to talk to you about what happens when you're in crisis. And before we talk about crisis, relapse is a sign that you have or were at some point in crisis. And if you can rename that, right? If we can rename our thoughts and feelings that I was in crisis, it's a lot easier to be kind to somebody who's in crisis rather than somebody who failed, right? Someone in crisis, the expectations actually change in crisis, right? So I was talking to a young woman today, and I said, okay, let's talk about expectations. So if a 12-year-old, right, if a parent comes to me and says the 12-year-old is not willing to do the dishes, Matt, what would you say about the 12-year-old in a family-friendly way?
Well,
I know.
family-friendly way. I don't have much of a filter when it comes to kids, as far as what their expectations are. So I have a very, you do it or you don't have much of an enjoyable life. So
they may or may not be threatened with the tent in the backyard. Just saying.
Talk to our nephew. He knows all about that one.
But okay, so you're thinking 12-year-old. My expectation is they can do the dishes, and for a majority of 12-year-olds, you may be right. But if a 12-year-old is in crisis, if the 12-year-old has recently been in a bicycle accident and he doesn't have use of his legs and he's in a lot of pain, does the expectation change for you? Are you then putting him in the backyard of the tent?
Well, our nephew maybe, but typically no.
Stop. We love all our nephews. Okay. But I think what we need to see, though, is that when we put someone in a crisis situation, we understand that their limits change. And so if you're in crisis, you have to understand your limits change and the expectations cannot be the same. Now, as you recover, right, and we're going to talk a lot about recovery today, as you recover, you work towards meeting expectations. But there's a lot of trial and testing and not pushing yourself. So I want to pull this down for a minute and talk a little bit about the crisis cycle. Hopefully you got a chance to look at it. I'm going to have you pull up the thing on the. Okay, so the crisis cycle starts with baseline. So baseline means this is your typical ability. This is the 12-year-old who can do the dishes, right? So the 12-year-old is expected to do dishes. Their thinking is generally, now they're 12, I know you could make a lot of comments, but they're generally reasonable, logical, and abstract, meaning they have full ability of whatever skills they have. They have the ability to use all those skills when they're at baseline. And then something happens. And sometimes it's as obvious as a bicycle accident, but sometimes it's not. We have emotional crises, right? Not just physical ones. So it could be a trigger. It could be as simple as I haven't had food for 6 hours, or I didn't get any sleep, or we talked to somebody the other day who has 3 sick kids. That is a level of crisis. And when you're in crisis, your expectations are either going to change and adapt, or you're setting yourself up for failure. Now, I'm not saying you get a get out of jail free card, but you definitely get a, this person needs to be monitored and we got to give them more support. And we're going to talk about what that looks like. Okay, but we escalate. Whatever that trigger is, we escalate. And as we escalate, we begin to lose the thought process. We stop thinking reasonably, right? We stop thinking logically. So the opposite of reasonable and logic is emotional, and your emotional brain kicks in. And you and I both know that your emotional brain likes a lot of comfort items, right? It's a comfort seeker. It says, I want to be comfortable as quickly as possible. And because I want to be comfortable as quickly as possible, I'm going to reach for the things that I have at hand, which is why we've talked about the need to create the environment, right? That we should have already updated our environment, because if we're comfort seeking, if we're in crisis, and there is a box of Oreos in the cupboard, the Oreos are going to be the comfort you seek, right? If you are in crisis and there is an opportunity to give in to whatever the negative habit is, you're going to do it. And so what we need to do is be aware of our environment, but we escalate to the point where we are in crisis. Another term for crisis, probably for people who don't use that as much, is acting out. And acting out just depends on whatever your behavior is. Acting out for Matt looks a lot different than acting out for me, and it looks a lot different than our nephew, right? But we all act out. We all act out.
No comment.
Thank you. But we all act out. And because we act out, we have to be aware that that means that we're in crisis. And instead of just giving in and saying, oh, I have no expectations, what I need to say, and we're going to talk through what it looks like tonight. I need to start using some of the reinforcements that I have available to me. And I need to start working on getting out of crisis and de-escalating and going into that recovery. Now, one of the things, we're going to show the slide one more time before we move on. One of the things when you look at the crisis cycle that you see is as you're de-escalating, the cycle, you can share, the cycle actually dips down a little bit, right? It goes past baseline to below baseline through the de-escalation crisis, and then goes into post-crisis. So emotionally, there's a time frame for most people when they're coming out of crisis, right? The crisis emotionally takes about 45 minutes to an hour to come out of crisis. So you need to plan for how to get through that crisis, and a lot of that has to do with coping skills. And when you get those coping skills, then you're going to start realizing that you are able to get yourself out of crisis and get back to baseline quicker. And so we're going to talk about this. So that's why I want you to understand that when you're in crisis, it's not a mistake as much as it is my ability has changed. And so a lot of what gets taught to us in overcoming and doing this is, how do I avoid crisis? There's nothing wrong with avoiding crisis. And how do I cope when crisis comes? Okay, so we're gonna go to the next one. So I've come up with 4 things to work through relapse. You can call it relapse, you can call it crisis, you can call it acting out, you can call it whatever makes you feel more comfortable. But we're gonna talk about relapse because that's the stage of change. And the 4 we're gonna talk about tonight are prepare, respond, recover, and reinforce. Okay? And by going through those 4, when you are in relapse, you're gonna be able to overcome. And I will tell you where I got these. I actually got this as I was looking for information on responding from how to respond to a natural disaster. And I took the plan that they have out there of what the response and the different stages of responding to a natural disaster, and I moved them so that they made sense in the relapse phase. Because I'm like, a lot of times we can describe relapse, but being very concrete on how to work through them. So we're going to go first to prepare. Okay, so the first thing, I like this quote. It says, expect problems, right? We've talked. Matt, are you supposed to expect relapse?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Matt is listening well. But expect problems and eat them for breakfast. What that means is you need to get up and deal with the problem before it happens. You can't just sit there and hide from the monster in the closet. You need to open the closet and get the monster out and give it a bath and, address it. So if you know there's a problem, if you know that you're going to Disneyland and all they're going to eat in the month of October is churros, and I don't know what else they're eating at Disneyland, but I tried to look up healthy food at Disneyland and it was not a positive experience for me. We have to come up with a plan. So that's part of preparation. So the next part, part of preparation is, 1, have a community, right? So I was worried about it. I shared it with the people I'm traveling with, that this is my concern. We are starting to talk to some other people and getting some ideas, but there's a preparation, right? Because, and my crisis is not going to be an emotional one. I'm more worried about the physical exhaustion of moving all day and making sure that I'm fueling my body correctly. And I don't think I can't do it, but it is a matter of being prepared. And so using a structure, right? And understanding, does my structure need to change? Another good example is, we talk about a health program. The health program is different for a woman who is nursing, because her body is using more calories. We wouldn't necessarily call that a crisis, but that is a level of acting, right? It's absorbing more calories, and so is expending more calories through the nursing process so that it needs more calories. And so we have a different structure. So we're not just saying, oh, don't do anything. You can do whatever you want because you are in this phase of quote unquote crisis. And, I don't mean breastfeeding is crisis. I just meant that your life is not normal. And there's a plan, right? And they know what their plan is, and that you can give them structure, and that will help them. And then they test their skills, and they come back and they give feedback to their coaches, right? To the Mr. Miyagi's in their life. And they say, hey, I'm still hungry, or maybe my milk supply has changed or whatever it is. And when they give that feedback, then they're going to test that skills and they have that community to work through it. And they're preparing and creating a plan. And so that's the first step, right? Is we're going to get up and eat our problems for breakfast because we're doing it before everything else. That's why I like the breakfast quote. It's about doing it before everything else, not waiting until you're in crisis. This is about doing it at baseline. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about responding. Okay, so the very first step to responding is acknowledging the relapse with empathy, right? Is acknowledging, you know what, I didn't perform the way I wanted, and it's okay. I'm an okay person, I'm loving. When you get stuck in that shame cycle, that's when we are not going to be able to respond. We start to avoid, right? That was the next thing. We start to avoid and we withdraw. And we withdraw from the whole process of change. And so a lot of times one of the first steps when you have hit a crisis or a relapse is to acknowledge it and say, this is what it was. And when you do that with empathy and kindness and grace, then you're going to be able to move forward. I love this quote by Margaret Heffernan, and says, you cannot fix a problem you refuse to acknowledge. And you cannot overcome a problem you refuse to acknowledge. So, that's the very first step with relapse, is acknowledging that I struggled, I was in crisis. We're going to identify the thoughts and emotions related. What de-escalated us? What created the acting out, right? Was it I wasn't prepared that day? Was it I didn't get enough sleep? Was it I had a crisis in my family? Was it I had a car accident? And whatever it was, identifying that. And what did I feel? When I felt that way, I felt scared or I felt vulnerable, right? That's an emotion that often leads to comfort seeking, but it's going to be an emotion that generally leads to this comfort seeking process. And then we're going to take healthy accountability. So I use the word healthy accountability. I tend to spend a lot of time teaching teenagers about accountability. Most of them think it's just saying you're sorry, right? That's what it was when they were 2, was just to say they're sorry. Accountability is owning your part. It's not owning everything, right? So for example, your part might have been asking yourself, did I prepare? If you did not prepare, then you just say, you know what? I didn't prepare. And that's healthy accountability. Now saying I'm a terrible person because I didn't prepare and I can't do this and I will never recover. Why did I even try? That is not healthy accountability. Okay. Take accountability for your part so you can grow, not so you can shame yourself and prove to yourself or all the little voices in your head that come from your past that they were right. This is about saying, I did this and I can recover from it, because, this is what I teach about accountability all the time. When you can own it, you can change it. But if you can't own it because it's either A, not yours, or B, you're not owning it the right way, then you're not going to be able to change it. And it's a sign that you have unhealthy accountability. So just be aware of that as part of the response, is finding the accountability. What happened? That's the question. It's not, why am I a terrible person? It's what happened. And when you can say what happened, if I say, okay, so today we're dog sitting and the dog chewed up their bed. And we could say, oh my gosh, I'm such a terrible person for going to work today, but I wasn't a terrible person. That is my job. The dog is just a puppy. It's a 4-month-old puppy and it chewed up its bed. This is part of it. My accountability is, could there have something I've been different? I don't know if there was, but I did clean up the mess because the puppy can't take accountability for that. I did wash the blankets. And I'm doing my part, but I'm not sitting there saying, oh, I'm so dumb and I should never dog sit again. I'm just saying, this is my part. You're not saying you're never dog sitting again. Okay. All right. So we're going to
say that.
We're going to go from respond, right? We're going to respond to the next one, which is recover. Okay. So once you've responded and you're recovering, this is very different. Like we talked about, a lot of times giving up comes up when you are not recovering, you are just giving up, right? So when we are, I was just thinking of being sick. And when I'm really sick, I'm not always thinking about recovering. But there comes a point where I'm like, okay, I need to get better. I need to drink the fluids. I need to go to the doctor. I need to do those things. And we're going to talk about what that looks like, because recovering from relapse looks a lot like recovering in any other way. So recovering means trying again, not necessarily trying the same thing. A lot of people say try again, try again. It's not always the same thing. There are adjustments. We talked about structure and plan, and that's how we avoid relapse. So you may need to tweak your structure and plan, but we're going to talk about how to do that. So first, you're going to identify what was your limiting belief. If you identified your emotion, you need to be identifying what your limiting belief was. My limiting belief is I can be perfect with no sleep. That's a limiting belief, okay? Or another example of a limiting belief is I should never want something I'm not supposed to have. It's a limiting belief. Because the minute you do, then you automatically go into that relapse shame cycle, and you're going to end up in that give up place because, you know, as a perfectionist, you set that unrealistic expectation. If you remember that from the action stage, that one of the things we do is set unrealistic expectations. And so limiting beliefs often go back to the expectation, right? And one of the ways we identify them is saying, what didn't we know? So if we go back to our 12-year-old and say, you know, a parent comes in as a therapist and says, my 12-year-old won't do the dishes, he's super defiant. And I just say, you're right. Can't believe that little snot-nosed brat isn't doing the dishes. Okay, I have a limiting belief that all 12-year-olds are capable of doing dishes, except for what I would do in that case is ask more questions, right? Well, so an example is, what's his favorite thing to do? Well, he likes to play video games. Okay, I feel like people who can play video games can do the dishes, right? Okay, what else does he like to do? He likes to ride his bike. Okay, when's the last time he was playing video games and riding his bike? Oh, well, 2 weeks ago, he had an accident. Okay, there comes the limiting belief, right? What I didn't realize is there was something that set this kid up for the crisis. And so my expectations had to change. And so a lot of times our limiting belief is about understanding crisis or understanding expectations that weren't appropriate. So the second is understanding and skills. Why did I do it? Why was I escalated is important? Because we have to come up with a plan. So the next morning when I get up, I can take care of that at breakfast, like we talked about, before everything else. And the second is skills. What do I need to do? So next time I have someone who is not riding their bike, instead of having him do dishes, I'm going to change the chore chart and say he can fold laundry, because you can do that sitting down, right? So I'm going to adjust. And I'm going to look at skills that I can use and things that I'm already good at. The third part is you're going to engage with your coach. This is why a coach is important in the whole process. Coaches actually help us, and maybe I should have said this at the beginning of this list, but they help us go through the steps of identifying limiting beliefs, understanding, and increasing skills. So when you recover, I won't say you, but a lot of people recover, they want to not tell anyone they messed up, right? And they want, because they're in shame, and they want to just fix it themselves, especially a lot of us adults who are super independent. We don't want to talk about this, and so we don't want to engage with a coach. And a coach can help you, and you have a limited amount of understanding. There's a great quote. I didn't look it up, but it says, you know, we can't solve problems with the same level of thinking that created them. I think it's by Albert Einstein, one of those really smart people, but that's the quote. And the quote is true, because often when you are still in recovery, remember, recovery doesn't mean you're back at baseline. Sometimes it means you're functioning below baseline, or you're not quite to baseline yet. So your coach is somebody who can help you resolve the problem while you're trying to figure out how to get back to baseline. And what part of what they're doing with the coach is revising the plan and saying, okay, we had a really good plan for, you know, Monday through Friday, but we have a weekend plan, and we're going to need to revise that and look at what that looks like for you, and how do we support you, and what, you know, asking a lot of those questions which is the process of identifying the limiting beliefs and the unrealistic expectations. Okay, so then the fourth part of this is reinforce. So I want you to take a look at the picture real quick. And we're going to talk about four things. We're going to talk about increasing engagement, getting feedback, and focusing on structure. And then I'm going to have Matt pull this down real quick as we talk about what reinforce means. The picture that I showed you is a copy of is a picture of a building in Provo. And years ago when I worked here, this was a church building. And one night, somebody went in and lit the building on fire. And it was a historic building. And what you can see there is that the shell of the building was all that was left, right? And there was a lot of discussions about what to do with the building, and they decided to rebuild. They decided that they were not going to just give up. They were going to recover, and they were going to not just relapse. And I love this story of this building because the building creates this understanding of sometimes we get back to just some really basics and we feel like, oh, is it worth just giving up? And I remember that at some point someone announced that this building was going to be what's the word? My architect husband. When it's restored, right? Restored, okay? Restored. Repurposed, okay? And what they did, and you can see, is they dug down and they looked for how to increase engagement, right? So people didn't just ignore the building. When the building had burned, right? If they just ignored it, do you think it ever would have recovered? It wouldn't have. They increased engagement. They had architects and all kinds of engineers come in and say, how do we get back to where we're doing? Are you hearing the coaching that's going on in this process? Okay. And then they're getting that feedback and they're saying, what can we do? How can we do it? And this, what you're seeing is a picture of the scaffolding that went underneath the building as part of trying to build the foundation. And is trying to build the foundation and getting that feedback. They had to focus on the structure, right? And if at any point they had not focused on the structure, if they had not increased engagement, the building would have been destroyed, right? But the amount of structure was sufficient. And this is how you know whether you have enough engagement and enough structure is because it's sufficient. Now, if you want to go see a really cool after picture, because we really like before and after pictures, right? Go look now at the building. It's called the Provo City Center Temple. And you will see that it has been fully restored and repurposed and is a beautiful temple. I have been in the building before it burnt down and after it's burnt down. And the truth is that its relapse, that's what I'm going to call it, actually created something beautiful and an opportunity for growth in a way that it wouldn't have happened if it had never burned. I really believe that if it had never, well, maybe not never, but if it hadn't burned, that they would continue to use it for meetings. And they would continue to do what they could with it because it was historic. But because it burned and it had a relapse process, they had to move forward, and they did it in the very best way possible. And it's one of my favorite stories of before and after when we come and look at what does it really look like. So those are the 4 steps to recovering. 1, prepare, respond. Hold on, I can't remember the other one and I didn't pull it up. Prepare, respond, recover, thank you, and then reinforce. Those are the 4 steps to dealing with relapse. So most of them start with R. I couldn't figure out an R one. But the P's kind of look like R's, so it worked out, right? But that's what it looks like. And so when you're going through your change process, whatever it may be, understand that relapse will happen. And just like a 2-year-old, right? We talked about this. Just like a 2-year-old who stands up and then falls down, be excited that you stood up and try to stand up again. And that is going to be the exciting part. And I think of the building, right? It stood up, it relapsed, but then it stood again and it was even better. And that is what happens through the relapse process. And I actually think the relapse process is really beautiful because it is the learning process that comes in change. And none of us can grow without learning. All right, I think now you're up.
Now I'm up. So here's some pictures of Jen and I over basically since the beginning of this year, showing some of the physical changes that we've made for us. And you can see those are some big numbers. For Jen in 7 months, it's a little over 105 pounds. And for me in 8 months, it's 196 pounds. So while that is a huge outward physical appearance change that we have gone through this year, the mental change and the abilities changed have been so much more. And we get asked a lot, has it been an easy road? Is it always been a perfect road? And they see those big numbers that Jen and I have gotten to and expect that we've had this perfect journey. And I will fully admit nothing is perfect. And if it was perfect, I wouldn't probably be on here tonight telling you more about it, because it's humbling when it's not perfect. If you're open-minded to the change and are willing to make the change and understand what's going on, it can be a humbling and blessing of an experience. So about, did we go in April or May? We were Hawaii.
April, end of April.
So about 3 months in to my journey of regaining my health this year, Jen and I went on vacation, and I had made a plan before we got there. I had packed everything I needed, and I stuck to that pretty well for about the first 4 or 5 days. And then one day we were off the schedule that I had planned for, and I basically went downhill from there. So I still was making better choices than I would have before in my eating plan and with things, but I let it slip and I justified it. And that's the one thing that I'm learning now as I go through our Habits of Health book and learning more about this system. And if you haven't got this book yet, you need to. It is amazing. This is one of 2. I don't have the other one in here, but this is by Dr. Anderson, who does our program, and I love it. What I was getting to is, by having that moment and those couple of days where I fell off my plan and I kind of was okay with that, I justified that. It gave me a time to reset and realize that, yes, this is going to be normal. This is going to happen, and it's okay that it's happened. Dr. Anderson talks a lot about the slip cycle and shortening that. And so when you get going and you're doing great, and then something happens, someone brings a box of donuts to work that day, or a cupcake, or whatever it is, it's about, okay, if you indulged and you didn't mean to, you didn't want to, that wasn't your idea, but you did, don't go on a bender. Don't go stop at the Taco Bell drive-thru on the way home. Stop that cycle, get back to your baseline again, and try again. And if you can shorten that cycle every time so it's a little bit less and a little bit less, so that if it happens, you can 10 minutes later start again and not beat yourself up about it and be okay about it and learn something with it. That's what we're trying to share here. And so we love what we've been learning with this program. We love that all of you have been able to join us and we're able to share our journey and our story a little bit along the way. And we hope that we have given you some knowledge and inspire you to either continue on your path to success, health-wise, mental-wise, whatever that is for you. We hope that is helping. And that if you have any questions, please reach out to the person who invited you, or reach out to your coach if you are on our program. And if you're not, please reach out to us or to anybody you know who is a coach within our program, because even though Jen and I are focusing on the weight loss side of our health this year, our plans are for everybody. There are things for all kinds of outcomes, no matter what you're looking for, whether it's health or it's mental or it's stamina or it is better nutrition based on because you're nursing. Or financial health, if that is something that you need to focus on. I will tell you, this program is absolutely amazing and has blessed our lives in so many more ways than just the outward appearance of, in my case, losing almost 200 pounds and Jen just over 100. So we highly recommend, as we wrap up the last of tonight's recordings, that you continue to improve and work on you and connect with the person who invited you and continue on that journey and explore that option if you are not already doing our program, because there are all kinds of resources out there, way more than we even realized when we started this back in January. So anyway, I think that's all I have to say. You have anything else?
What did you have to say?
Oh, no.
So Matt told me that I had to wait until I finished this presentation before I could start my next one. But I do have a plan for next month. It's not going to be a series next month. It's just going to be a single event where we're going to talk about a mental contraband, basically, and the thoughts basically that sabotage us. And we'll find some kind of cute saying for it, and we'll post it soon. I'll make Matt do the graphics because, you know, he's a good Vanna. But we really appreciate all your guys' support, and, you know, more than anything, we hope that this has added value to your life, and that you, good luck on your journey. Find your coach, work with them. We believe in you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.